Hi, I'm James Knight, Yacht Tech. We're here in Anacortes, and we are back by popular demand to walk through this beautiful Nordhavn 62, the iconic Nordhavn 62. We are on the back of 62 number 26. Matthew and I did a video on the 57 that took off. I wasn't quite ready for the number of views that it had. In fact, we decided we were going to put it on YouTube for a couple of select customers to download and watch, and then the next thing I knew it had 20,000 views or something. So a lot of people had called me and asked for us to do a walkthrough on a 62. Other models as well, but 62 is very close in specs to the 57, speed-wise, engine-wise, and performance-wise. So, and it's another one of my favorites. This boat is not for sale. I have to put that in there right up front. There's an awful lot to talk about with the 62. Again, you probably saw the last video, so over 20 years of experience on Nordhavns in general. 62's probably 19 years experience, and I could find hours of things to talk about. I apologized many times in the last video because I thought it was going to be too long. Matthew was giving me a hard time about it, but the reality is an awful lot of people called me and emailed me and said it wasn't long enough. Keep talking, keep telling us. So then I started going back through the video and I thought, you know, there's things that I missed. I should have said this and I should have said that, you know, positives and negatives alike. And I want to try and get through this boat and not miss as much as I did on the 57. People wanted me to go in the Lazarette. I thought I didn't go in the bulbous bow on the 57. There's a big locker up forward under the bed. I missed that as well. So I'm going to try and get it all. We'll head on inside. So, as I said, here we are, a 2003 Nordhavn 62. This boat is called One Day, and we have between us, Frank and I, my partner and I up here in Anacortes, Frank sold this boat some years ago, and then it came to Florida, and I met with the chap that bought it from Frank, and we sold it for him to Don and Judy. Don and Judy had it for 2 or 3 years. They did a lot of work on this boat. We did a lot of work on this boat, and then we recently sold it, say 2 years ago. We sold it again to the present owner, who, like I said, is stuck up in Canada, unfortunately, but we talk most days. And you know, I said in the beginning, the boat's not for sale, but he was kind enough to let me do this walkthrough video so you guys can see what a 62 has to offer. And hey, look who it is. Frank, good to see you.
Good to see you, James.
Yeah, you were about to shake my hand there, weren't you? That's not allowed anymore.
No shaking hands, no.
So yeah, Frank's up here in Anacortes still. I came up to join Frank, and it's kind of funny. I was thinking about it the other day. This boat, the first time I got on this boat was when Frank had it listed for sale, and that would have been back in 2011, right, Frank? I think.
Right, had it listed in 2011, sold it in 2012, right.
So that back then the boat was called Amazing Grace, and she was and still is an amazing boat. In fact, in many ways, she's even more amazing now.
Yes.
I don't know if you recognize this, do you?
I hardly recognize it with the new granite on there, and wow.
Same
a lot of work
same refrigeration. I think the backsplash got changed, but the sinks
believe so. I don't recall that being the same, but it looks very nice, very clean.
Yeah.
Obviously loved by the owner.
My goodness, they've spent a lot of time and effort and money keeping this boat in really nice shape. Recently, Matthew, as you can imagine, got his hands on the headliners.
Yeah, I recall it needed that. But now, wow.
Yeah, they came out looking like factory.
Yeah.
We're pretty excited about that. We've still got some to do. You'll see as we move forward through the boat. Some of them are still sagging in places, but you know, we've got the bulk of the big ones done, and we're waiting for Magellite to send us some more material. So hopefully that'll be here in a few days, and Matthew can wrap up the job. I'm heading back to Florida actually to show some Nordhavns over there. People that called me because of the last 57 video and want to go look at 57s, so we're going to take care of that for a few days, and I'll leave Matthew here doing headliners on this boat.
Well, I'm just on my way to list another boat, James, so maybe you can help me sell that one as well.
We'll
Great to see you. Good job, Matthew, and the headliners.
Take care, Frank.
See ya.
Nice to see you. All right, so we're going to work our way through the boat here. Like I said, under the floors, in the bilges. I'll talk about some of the challenges with the boat, but more often the good points. You know, this really is one of probably the most traveled Nordhavns. I mean, there's many people who have taken them around the world and across oceans, and you know, I talk to people all the time who have dreamed about owning 62s, dreamed about it. In fact, I sold a 62 number 32 about 2 months ago, two and a half months ago, to a chap who had been looking. He came to me probably 5 years ago, and during the COVID situation, we had actually locked down in Florida, and he was passing by in his car, and he dropped in and said, "James, its time has come. I really want a 62." And so we found him one that was not listed for sale, and we made it happen. And during the course of that process, I had many conversations with he and his wife about the pros and cons of 62s versus 57s, funnily enough. And his wife was really sold on a 57, particularly the one that was sitting in Hawaii for a while. We were thinking about heading to Hawaii, and I talked her out of it. So I had to be a little bit careful. In fact, when he saw the 57 video, he said, "James, you better hope my wife never sees that video, because you said it's your favorite boat." And I said, "Hang on, it's one of my favorite boats. The 62 is another one of my favorite boats, and also is close to the top of the list. I can definitely see myself owning a 62 one day if I ever have the money to do it." This is an absolutely stunning boat, performance-wise amazing, and very, very capable. Some of the other boats probably beat it in directional stability. You know, if you talk to 62 owners, yep, they all love them, other than the engine room. But in a down sea, especially with the bustle on the back, and we'll talk about the bustle being added, that's the swim step on the back with the hatch. The boat does tend to wander around in a following sea. There's a lot of buoyancy back there. When they added the bustle on hull number 8, was the first one to get it. They never really changed the position of the props the same. The rudder did get changed because the rudder wasn't big enough. They needed a bigger rudder because the waves get under the back of the boat and shove it around. So a bigger rudder was needed, and of course then they figured out that there wasn't enough steering capacity, so the rams had to get beefed up as well. Okay, so you can see that this is the wide body version, right? The Salon here on 6226 is pushed out all the way to the port side. Many people already know that there are wide bodies and there are narrow bodies, or asymmetrical. So this is an asymmetrical, and you know, you do tend to miss that walkway a little bit if you're docking like we are now, port side 2. But you saw in the beginning of the video probably me rolling up to the back of the boat. We're a little bit away from the dock right now, but you can step aboard from the back if you're on a floating dock. Coming on board from the port side is very, very awkward if you don't have that stern to. There is no boarding door, so you're climbing. That is a downside to the 62. Now, you could put tide rise steps. Sometimes people put tide rise steps on the port side so that if you're port side 2, you can come up from the tide rise steps and step up on the side. But you know, generally speaking, you would want to try and come in starboard side too. Now, if you've got a double walk around, then obviously that opens up the possibilities. You can tie up port side too and get on and off very easily. You can also keep these windows cleaner. A little tricky to keep the windows clean on this boat because you have to step on the cap rail out there and hang onto a handrail while you're keeping the windows clean. And on the 62 that we just sold over on the East Coast, there was a fair amount of staining on those windows, so you know, we had to work pretty hard to get that off because they didn't get cleaned very often. In the cockpit here, let's go back and look out in the cockpit. We'll spend a little bit of time out here. So the 62s are all different, every one of them, and just when you find one that you think you like but it's not available and you go hunting for another one that looks the same, you'll be very disappointed because I don't believe there are two out there that are alike. So one of the things that some of the boats have, but not all of them, is a seating and table area back here, and I'm quite familiar with that because on one of the boats, I think it was 6227, I ordered one from Nordhavn and it was shipped in and we installed it because the owner wanted it. As with the deck boxes up front, and I'll show you those. They didn't all come in with deck boxes, the early ones didn't have them. There's also a box in front of the pilot house that I'll show you. So back here we've got a barbecue grill, and again, they don't all have them. This one has an electric melee grill. I've put in fact I was watching a Mermaid Monster video last night and I noticed that they were grilling on the back of Emanu, which is 62 number 15, and I put that grill in probably 12 years ago. That was a Gagano grill, and there are 3 drawers I think under here, and I took one of them, opened it up, took the guts out of it, and I mounted the controls for the Gagano grill right inside one of these, which I thought was pretty cool, and it's all still there and still working, so I was pleased to see that. Most of them have the controls back here. There's no steering on this boat, but we do have bow and stern thruster controls, engine, start, stop and horn, so but no steering. So if you're going to use it for docking, you just basically are stuck with using the bow and stern thruster to adjust the position of the boat as you come into the slip. And we can always add, and we have done that for people, add steering so you can actually push the stern around with the rudder. Big barn door rudder down there, just like all the others. You push the rudder over and give it some forward, and you will push the stern of the boat around. Cap rails. So these cap rails are teak. The 62s, actually there's a Undine there, I think that's 6205, I've got to check my numbers. Those cap rails obviously are bare wood, and many of the 62s people do leave them bare because once you varnish them, it's a mission to keep them looking nice. The wood moves. There are seams. In fact, you can see a seam right here that's opening up a little bit. Those seams move, and when you have varnish on there, the moisture gets in and it turns yellow, and you've got to be on top of that real quick, otherwise you lose your varnish job. And to do a varnish job on a 62, speaking from experience, is anywhere from 11, well that was a long time ago now, 11 grand I think was the cheapest we ever did one. You're probably talking 15 or 16 grand to do a full strip and varnish job on a 62. Now there's a lot of teak on this boat. Depends who you have do it and where you have it done and whether they block it, because there's a big difference between the varnish job where it's been properly blocked down and you can look across it looks like glass, or somebody that digs holes in it with a palm sander, and then you're looking at hills and valleys. So I'm standing here back on the swim step, or what PAE refers to, and I do now of course as well, the bustle on the back of the 62. And the bustle was an afterthought. Hull number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, 7 included. Yep, 7 I actually put a bustle on some years ago. 8 was the first boat to get a bustle. We'll talk about 8 in a little while when we get further forward. Some sad news on that boat many years ago. I'm sure some of you know about it. But that boat was the first one to get a bustle, and it's a great addition to the boat. However, it does change the handling a little bit. As I said, inside there was some changes that were made to the steering gear to accommodate the bustle. It really is nice to have extra space because the 62 back here is lacking in space. The Lazarette, because of its canoe stern, isn't very large. The bustle gives you this added spot, but it is a rather wet area unless you're very, very careful. So this one's had additional rubber seals put around the hatch. If you're going off on a long trip, you probably want to get some hurricane tape or something and tape the bustle down. 6224 came in years ago. We sold it, and the inside of the bustle was absolutely immaculate. And I asked them, how the heck do you keep it so nice? Because it does get wet down there when you're underway. They said, whenever we go out and we're expecting any kind of seaway, we always tape the bustle up. So put it down, run some tape around it, and keep it dry. So down here, and you can come down in a second, we've actually got, and this one is in pretty good shape too. It's actually got a little 6 kW generator back here on the starboard side, and we've got a dive compressor down here on the port side. And then some years ago for Don and Judy, when they had the boat, they wanted to put some Kallenberg horns, so we put it's a big Kallenberg, I'll let you hear it later. We put an air tank back in the back here. We were trying to put it in a spot where it wouldn't take up valuable space, so you'll see that when you climb down in here. There's always a little bit of water in front of the thruster tube. This is the stern thruster tube right here. It's a horseshoe shaped tube. You'll see that there's a bleeder on top of it. The problem with the horseshoe tubes is that they gather air. So if you have a diver on the boat and he's down there cleaning, you know, his air bubbles get trapped in there. And you've got to remember to open up that valve and bleed the air out every time there's been a diver on the boat. Slight corrosion here, nothing too much. This has obviously been kept clean and painted. We've got the holding tank pump out valve over there. The exhaust for the wing engine goes out the starboard side. There is a bilge pump down here, and it does pick up from just in front of that thruster tube. However, it's quite a flat area. There's no sump, so the bilge pump can never drain that bilge area out completely. So there's always, unless you go and sponge it out, there's always some water sloshing around in the front of the bustle on a 62. So that's just something to be aware of. Now, it's a very rigid structure. It was added to the boat after the boat was molded. But it was added solidly, as everything is done on the Nordhavn 62. Unfortunately, the yard uses polyester resin and filler when they fare everything in, and that has over the years led to some problems that we've had to deal with. Those problems manifest themselves in the form of cracks. I don't know if you can follow me around here. Don't want to knock Matthew off. But in the tops of the rub rail, this rub rail right here, if you've ever been around a 62 and looked, you'll see that there's oftentimes cracks in that rub rail, especially on the darker hulled boats, because it's an upper facing surface and it gets very hot in the sun. So that heat will move the filler, and that filler cracks and opens up, and it looks pretty ugly. So we've spent a lot of time fixing those over the years on different boats. This one looks like we fixed it fairly well. There are still a couple of cracks on there, but normally what we do is we open it up and lay some glass on top of the rub rail and then fare it and fill it, and this one's painted. This hull has actually been painted. So that's all been done on this boat. The other issue is that underneath where the bustle is fared into the hull, it's done with the polyester filler also, and I haven't seen a 62 that didn't have blisters on the underside where the bustle meets the hull. It's a matter of time, but that filler gets wet and you end up getting blisters in there. The only way to fix it is to get in there with a grinder, grind out all that filler, fill it with epoxy, refare it, and repaint. So that's just something that comes with the territory with a 62. Get used to it. So, standing looking at the transom of the 62, you'll notice that there are some steps there, some stainless steel steps. They work as a swim step. They don't go down very deep. The lower step is all the way at the bottom. In fact, just under that step, maybe 3 inches under that step, is where the hull moves forward, and there's a chine there. So that step is a problem. If you are thinking of buying a 62 and you're going to survey, you want to keep an eye on that step, check it for corrosion, because they get pitted, and there are 2 studs that pass through the transom, and those studs break off. And the last thing you need is that thing breaking off when you're stepping on it, because it's underwater and then you're left with a little hole in the boat. It's not a big hole, it's not going to sink you, but you know, it's something to pay attention to. And also, again, if you're looking at a 62, don't be surprised if you see blisters underneath there where that bustle meets the hull. Now, the swim step actually comes with the boat. A lot of people have thrown them away. In fact, well, thrown them away, donated them. I have a couple of them in Florida on my shelf. In fact, I think I have the one off of this boat on my shelf. It is a ridiculously cumbersome contraption that you have to store down in here. It takes up a ridiculous amount of space. You know, beautifully manufactured, as with everything on the Nordhavn 62, just not very well engineered. It is massive, and it sits down and drops into a pair of these holes here for the staple holes. And you know, I mean, it's really good. It's got 2 big handrails, so if you're coming up with dive gear on, I mean, it's solid, but it takes a lot of space up, and space is really at a premium in the back of the boat here. So those tend to get put aside. If you want one, I have a couple of them. Now, check this out. This sucker is monstrous. I mean, you know, you thought the cap rail on the 57 was big and heavy? Look at that. That sucker is built for a tank. I'd say bulletproof, but you know, I said that too many times in the last video apparently. So, if you're wondering how it is that I know so much about 62s, I just pulled up my list here because I can't remember all the ones that I've worked on, but 6204, which was the predecessor to this boat here, that's 6205. Frank actually sold that boat a couple of years ago. It's now for sale with Nordhavn, and they're busy polishing up the hull. She's starting to look pretty good. So that is 05. Oh, I didn't work on 06, but I did work on 07.
I worked on 08, I worked on 09, I worked on number 14.
Anyway, so yeah, over the years I've worked on a few of them, and you get to know the ins and outs. So we're going to go down into the Lazarette here and take a quick look, and I'll show you the steering gear. And there's a couple of things down here to pay attention to when you're doing your engine room checks. Underway, you should always remember to come out here and open up the Laz, assuming that the weather conditions allow it. You're right, Matthew, that one is stiff. Okay, so while we're opening this up, this non-skid, Matthew's got his shoes on right now, but one of the big complaints from new owners of 62s, new owners, people that have just bought them or are looking at them, and they get on this non-skid with their bare feet, the non-skid is aggressive. And when I say aggressive, I mean if you're kneeling on it, it hurts. So, opening the Laz on the 62 reveals the rotor stock right here, regular packing gland. There is a bearing, top bearing inside here in the rotor table. You can see it's all pretty beefy, as you would expect on a 62. The steering cylinders here, fairly easy to get to. Always when you're doing your engine room checks, again, don't forget to come out here and have a look. Make sure that you don't have leaks in your steering rams. Make sure that nothing's chafing. Make sure that you don't have any lateral movement here in your rotor stock. No leakage. So this boat has air conditioners down here. So some of the early 62s have air conditioners in the engine room itself. This boat has air conditioners back here in the Laz. This is a dry area, so that's good. 6225, I'm curious to know, actually, because I've seen that boat for a long time, but I commissioned it. 6225 had the air conditioners back in the bustle, which I thought was fairly ridiculous. So I'd be curious to know how they're doing, because like I said before, it's a fairly wet area. There were quite a few things about 6225 that were different, including the main engine, the power, main engine power, which was an MTU. But we're going to talk about main engines and which engines they used over the years. So these 62s, they all have this tool. Sometimes it gets put in place because people don't know what it's for, but that's for tightening up the bearing here. So make sure that gets kept in a safe place. I'm not so sure about there. You've got to be careful taking that in and out. This is very important not to scratch these. If these get scratched at all, then it can tear up the seals inside the steering ram. So I don't like to have anything heavy in that area. We've got a couple of oil pads down there on this boat. They need changing out. Looks like there's been some drippage. It's always good to keep those oil pads right there clean and dry, and that way every time you come in or every time you look, you can see if there is any drippage, any drips starting. I usually rub my finger underneath and see. Now this boat's been sitting for a while, and I don't see any. It is a non-pressurized system. This has a high drive, an Australian high drive system, same as the 57. There's no pressure other than when you're turning the wheel. It's not a power assisted steering system. I think there is one out there that has a power assisted steering system. It may be 17. That was a long time ago that I was on that boat, but anyway, one of the things that I noticed when I opened these 62s up, almost invariably it smells back here. So what you store back here, you've got to be a little cautious with. And the reason it smells back here is because the holding tank hoses come right through the bulkhead here, and the way that it's designed with this little pump here, that pump tends to permeate the smell. And I think this one smells a little bit. It's been closed up. Probably need to change out these hoses. These hoses have actually already been done. I think I changed that one out maybe a couple of years ago back in Florida when we sold the boat, or before we sold the boat. But these probably need to be changed. And my guess is that this needs to be changed. We've got the black water discharge pump down here under the rudder table. And then the black water discharge through hull is back there in the Lazarette, which kind of is a pain to get to if you want to close it. I mean, technically it's supposed to be closed for the Coast Guard. The boat has a little key, so you can turn the key and lock it and put the key away, which might satisfy the Coast Guard. But usually, if they're depends on what kind of mood they're in, they might want to go hunting for the through hull. In which case, you better have it closed. And it's awkward to get to. It's on the outboard side in the bustle, like I said. And if you've got a ton of stuff stored back there, dive gear and everything, you got to crawl in there and get that sucker closed and open. And do not run the pump. There's nothing to stop you doing it, so it's not idiot-proof. We like to have things idiot-proof. waterproof, but they're not always. So if you run that pump with the valve closed, it pressurizes. It's not going to blow anything, but what happens is it pressurizes the tube, the hose between the pump and the discharge through hole, gets up to pressure, and then when you turn the pump off, that pressure pushes back into the pump. The pump has two 1.5-inch duckbill valves in it. It's a T24 on this boat, and those duckbill valves turn inside out, and then once they're inside out, if you're quick to rescue it, you could probably get away with it, but if you let it sit like that for a while, then those inverted duckbill valves will stick and it won't pump again. So you've got to take it all apart and change it. Okay, there's nothing else down here I don't think worth talking about, other than obviously it's got the warping winch here, or the pot puller, as some people would call it up here in the Pacific Northwest. I think that we're done with the... Oh, no, there is one more thing. You probably don't want to hear about this, but as you know from the other video, I tell you everything. Well, I try to. I was on a 62, number 15, crossing the Gulf of Maine, and this here snapped off on me. Pretty scary, huh? If you want to hear the story, I can tell you about it. I'm not going to go into it right now because it's probably a 15-20 minute story, and it's pretty interesting what I discovered. But the bottom line was, I was with the owner of the boat. We had recently put an articulating rudder on that boat. I did a couple of them. So I think that the tiller arm was probably loaded a little more than it would have been with the normal rudder. Still shouldn't have broken off, but it actually snapped off right at the weld in the Gulf of Maine. And we ended up bringing the boat in with emergency tiller, so I got to experience driving a 62 with the emergency tiller, and I found quite quickly in big seas that I'm not big enough to do it. So don't think that you are. Luckily I had a big heavy guy on the boat, and he managed to steer the boat until I got the problem resolved, which I did. But again, it's a long story, so if you want to hear about it, call me. Early 62s, 3 small windows. Later 62s, 2 big windows. The iconic 62 probably has the small windows, but I like the big windows. Picture windows, more light. I think it looks more modern. But again, you know, there is a difference there. Boarding door, heavy duty cap rail, like I said, super heavy. Heavy hinges, opening out, which again, you know, somebody actually mentioned that in the 57 video. I totally agree. Not the greatest design, but opening inboard presents some challenges too. So, you know, Nordhavn has done what they've done, and I've ended up fixing a lot of boarding doors because of it. So this is a spot on 62s that almost always cracks, okay? I've got some tape over it right now just because tape in my face reminds me it needs to get fixed. There was some gungy stuff dripping out of it. I need to get in there with a Dremel tool, and we're going to fill it. This was a problem for the previous owner too, and I told them the same thing. Everybody asked me, what do you do about it? Well, you got to get some glass in there, so you need somebody to fix the thing properly. I would be surprised if you went on a 62 and didn't see that somebody had already, if it's not cracked, you'd probably see a little bit of a shadow there where somebody's already gel coated. It's been done before, probably more than once. They also crack on the upright on the back there. I think this one looks pretty good, but that upright is fairly common for cracks as well, so don't be surprised. Doesn't mean the boat's falling apart. It's aesthetic. It's not structural. Engine room ventilation. Engine room ventilation on the 62 sucks, but we can make it better. Fuel fill for the engine room starboard tank, which is the tank that we usually use as a day tank. I'll explain that when we get down to the engine room. This door, obviously when they built the boat, didn't fit, and they decided to make it fit, which I think is hilarious. It works. You know, when you're in a marina and you hear that, or you hear that, I don't know if it's just me, but I hear Nordhavn. You can tell a Nordhavn door closing from 500 yards away. You see? Headbanger. Did you just hit your head? That is a headbanger right there. Almost everybody hits their head in that spot, especially when you're wearing a cap, because you don't see it. Donk. And I've done it many times, though I know that it's there. All right, so I'm not going to give you the spiel on the Aratex davit because we've been there and you don't want to hear it all over again. But look at that. It's gorgeous. Looks like the day it was made.
Oh no, they can see me.
This actually is a 2,500 pound davit. You can tell the difference because it has 2 lift cylinders. If you look under here, it's got a double lift cylinder. So this one's had its hoses replaced, although there still is a leak in there, and I got to get in and figure out where it's coming from. But this one has had some work done on it and should be in good shape. I'm sure it's probably just a fitting that needs tightening up. Gorgeous davit. Deck boxes. You can fit. Oh no, you're wearing shoes. You can't feel that. But like I said, this non-skid here is aggressive on your feet. After a while, you get used to it, and it's almost like a foot massage. If you want to descale your soles of your feet, you can do that too. All right, so these deck boxes were additional. The later boats had them. You might not be able to see this, but there are some cracks here on the deck, and again, not uncommon for a 62. And one of the reasons is the decks are quite dark, and they get hot, and the gel coat is very thick. And so whenever you get heat, cold, you get movement. And when you get movement, you get cracking. So it's not everywhere, but there are a few places on this boat, and I've seen worse. I mean, some of the 62s where the cracks are more significant. Again, it's not a structural thing. The gel coat, it's really in the non-skid. The grey non-skid is laid over the top, and it's thick. So this boat has a fuel tank, which is quite common, gasoline tank or petrol tank, depending on where you are. Petrol for me, of course. So there's a little petrol tank there, and storage area for hoses and what have you, which is nice if you're in remote parts up in Alaska or out in the Bahamas or out in the Pacific somewhere. You can carry some spare dinghy gas with you. Maxwell horizontal windlass, very similar to the 57 windlass. It's the 3500. And that anchor is just the standard Aratex anchor that came with the Nordhavn. Somebody's drilled a hole in it, which is kind of nice. Stops the thing from jumping around. And what else have we got up here? So this dock box or deck box is just an empty one, just for storage. It's got a shelf in there and a brace. But again, that's good for all your cleaning equipment. It's not really big enough for fenders, so what we usually do is just put the fenders in the dinghy. I've got a couple in there right now, but and then these railings up here tend to be places to stow fenders. This is important because when you lower the davit down when you're underway, the davit tends to swing around. Some people put a little brace here or a couple of pad eyes and then a V-strap that you can tie this to. But this, I think it was probably made by Trevor Streech, I would guess. He did nice work, does nice work. Looks like his kind of stuff. So that brace, the davit sits down in there, and it just takes the load off of everything and stops it from moving around when you're underway. Fender stowage here. Most of the time we just tie them in between this frame. Some people have a little outboard possibly that they put on there as well if they've got a small tender on the starboard side. And then this was also an option, having the extra, which is just nice because you can always do with more space, right? So we've got deck chairs, the lifting gear for the davit is in there. We've got line stowage up here in the Portuguese Bridge. We've got port and starboard control stations, and if we get a chance, we're going to take this boat out. We'll see if we have a chance tomorrow. But here is an absolutely ideal spot for parking the boat. You don't have a flybridge on a 62, of course, right? But you know, you don't have to have a flybridge. I mean, this boat has all kinds of deck space. When we were doing the delivery on the 62 a couple of months ago up to Barnegat, we spent a lot of time out on the foredeck sitting on beanbags in the sun. I mean, the weather was fantastic. And then if you want to be back on the aft of the boat, if it's a bit rougher, you can go back here. There's lovely seating area. It's nice and quiet back here, up away from the splashing of the water. You do have the drone of the exhaust because this is a dry stack. this boat was equipped with these brackets to hold the flopper stoppers. Nice thing about the 62 is the flopper stopper poles, not stabilizers here, but flopper stoppers are for anchor. They're already set up there, so they're already rigged up. All you have to do to deploy them is to uncleat the uphaul and let the pole down, and then if you attach this to the end of the flopper stopper and just heave it over the side, then you're all set and ready to go. So it's really a 5-minute job to put the flopper stopper out, as compared to, say, the 57, where you've got to deploy the pole, you've got to put the rigging on it, you've got to get the plate out. This makes a big difference, just having the plate here where it's accessible, where you can just pull it out of the rack. We actually had these made for the previous owner and put them on there. I think we've done a few boats. Accurate Metal Works is next door to us in Palm Beach. They've done them for us. I think they probably did these and electroplated them. So under here is more storage. There's more storage back in here, which is really nice. These tables drop down, and you can take the supports out and drop the tables down. And then some of the boats, I don't think this has them, but some of the boats have full cushions that go all the way across here, so you can turn this into a bed. Downside for the 62 with the dry stack, Pendana 6220 is a 62 that I spent a lot of time on, and that boat has wet exhaust, as do some of the others. You lose this stack here, which is really nice if you're up here socializing. You know, it kind of ruins it having the stack right in the middle of everything, because if you've got somebody sitting over there, you can't exactly sit here and talk to them, which is annoying. But I'd still probably go for the dry stack 62. I like the dry stack. But I'm going to show you something in a second that you got to take into consideration when you're choosing dry over wet. Another storage spot right here. We're going to keep on moving. That has some fenders in it. Windows and doors. PMC Windows and Doors. I think that's the name of the company. Canadian. That's now Diamond Sea Glaze. These windows probably haven't been touched up. No corrosion. Amazing. Really nice shape. The doors and windows on the 62s are super high quality, and you know, they are obviously aluminum frames, and they can corrode, but generally speaking they stay in good shape if you keep them washed when you come in. This is just a little control for the Carlisle Finch searchlight. We're going to go down into the engine room in a few minutes, and we're going to talk about engines, propulsion, and dry stack versus wet exhaust. A little bit more of that. You know, everyone has their opinions. One of the challenges with a dry stack, and we talked about it a little bit in the last video on the 57, was soot. And soot with the Komatsu 6125 lugger is a challenge. In fact, not to say bad things about boats, but you know, it's just something you have to be aware of. I love the engine, but if you look up at that stack behind me, you'll see what I'm talking about. As opposed to an electronic engine, John Deere 6125. You've still got soot, but it doesn't look like that. It's a clean burning engine. Cleaner. We came up here from the Portuguese Bridge, so we didn't attempt the pilot house stairs, but in a little bit we're going to go down the pilot house stairs, and you're going to see how steep they are. They're pretty steep. Okay, before you say anything, these headliners are the only ones that we are not doing on the boat. They don't look too bad. They are not Yacht-Tech headliners. Somebody else did them. They didn't use Magilite. The foam is quite thick. They don't look factory. They're okay, but we're not going to redo these, I don't think, yet. Till he sees ours, and then he might want them done in black. I would do them in black. I've done quite a few 62s. Have done quite a few 62s in black. It makes a big difference with the reflection of the screens in the pilot house, and it looks great. All the lights on this boat have been changed to LEDs. These all came from Emtra a few years ago. We supplied them, the owner put them in. They make a big difference. Really nice warm LEDs. Seating area on this boat, quite similar to most of the other boats. However, some of the 62s had a head in this area. A lot of them had this little office area, which I prefer, although when you want to go to the head on this boat, you know, you've got to take a trip. So you're going down the steps, you're going forward, and you know, some people don't want to do that. So there are 62s out there that have a head, and wet head here, so a little shower too and a sink. And then there's also some 6229 in particular we sold a couple years back that had a captain's cabin right here. So there's a bulkhead here. It pushes everything forward. It gets pretty tight in the pilot house. The bed is here, so the bulkhead is probably about here. So you can just about get in, and then there's a little office area at one end. They all have, as far as I'm aware anyway, they all have a freezer under here. So there's a wooden lid there that you pull up, and underneath there's a nice chest freezer. That lid, just take the cushion out of the way, the lid hooks up on here. Be real careful. This one's actually been bent, and it's probably been bent for a reason, because if you're not careful and you knock that sucker while you're leaning into the freezer, it'll release it, and then all of a sudden you've got a big heavy lid falling down on your head. That's probably why that hook is a little bit bent, just to give it a bit more security. Filing drawers, plenty of storage. There's storage for charts under here, 2 chart drawers. There's storage underneath the cushions. There's more drawers over there. There's computers down under here. There's all kinds of storage up here, which is really nice. And we've got drawers, and we've got a small electrical panel here. We're going to talk a little bit when we get to the forward end of the boat about batteries and voltage. Early 62s were all 12 volts. The later 62s became 24 volts. There was a period in the middle where they were 12 and 24. They were kind of an odd duck boat. Nordhavn did that with a few of them. They put battery equalizers in them, and you know, they work. They're still out there. They're still working. They're just a bit too complicated, really. So you probably want to know what you're getting into when you buy one, and how they work and how the power is distributed. And the reason I say it's worth looking into is because on a 62 it's a big boat, right? I mean, we're talking 67 feet overall, and your power, the batteries, your power supply, basically DC, is all the way in the bow, okay? And your demands, your loads, some of them, big ones perhaps, are in the back of the boat. Take for instance the autopilot pumps. Autopilot pumps usually are DC pumps. Your batteries are up there, your pumps are back there. Your round trip wiring for that is probably 150 feet or so. That's a lot of volt drop. So on a 12 volt boat, you know, that volt drop can be an issue. And when you're underway, then you've got alternators pushing out current and charging the battery, so you don't notice the volt drop as much. When you're sitting around waiting for a bridge or something and you're idling and the alternators aren't putting out any power, if your batteries are weak, then you're going to have issues. We've had issues on other boats too, you know, not just 62s but 57s, on hydraulic systems that also run on 12 volts. The early 57s were 12 volts. And I remember the owner of 57 number 19 calling me up and saying, hey, you know, I got a problem. Every time I come into harbour, I lose my thrusters. What the heck's going on? So we kind of worked through it and we figured it out. You know, his batteries were bad, and you know, if the alternators weren't putting out any current, he didn't have enough voltage to drive his thrusters. So anyway, something to think about. Again, power up forward, loads at the back of the boat. You've got a panel up here that's running off of those batteries. So from those batteries to this panel, and then obviously from this panel you're going down to the autopilots, you're going, you know, to various other places on the boat. You know, those round trip wire runs are probably getting off for 150 feet. So 24 volt makes life easier. And you know, I'm not saying we can't do it. We've had that challenge on a number of the early 62s. Wasn't really an issue when the 62s were built, but as they get older now, people and there's more and more electronics and people want more and more stuff, they add things to them and they add power hungry items, and those items can cause a challenge because now the loads are bigger and bigger and bigger. What's helping now are the loads on the lighting circuits, of course, because everybody's kind of going to LED, which makes a big difference. An LED draw on a boat like this probably is 5 to 10 amps, whereas originally when these boats were delivered with halogen lights in them, you turn all the lights on this boat and you were probably drawing 100 amps at 12 volts. So big difference on LEDs. That does help, but remember, you don't usually turn all your lights on the boat at one time. So anyway, that's it for up here. We've got some of the similar systems to the 57 engine shutdown systems. I can quickly walk through if you want. We've got stabilizer control over here. This boat has ABTs. We're going to talk about stabilizers when we get down there too. The access to the stabilizers is good. You know, you've got naiads and you've got ABTs, and there are things that you could say about both of those, pluses and minuses. So we'll talk about that a little bit when we get downstairs. This is a full hydraulic boat. Hydraulic controls here, wing and main pump. Something else we'll talk about in the engine room, this boat has a pump on the main and the wing. The early boats, like the one next door here, probably that's a different animal. That one that has a cruising generator on it, similar to number 4, which we sold a couple of years back. That boat has a Naiad stabilizer system and a ABT thruster system. So you've got 2 separate systems, 2 separate reservoirs. You know, you could argue that if you have a leak in your stabilizer system, you still got your thrusters, or vice versa. This boat has 1 tank, and many of the later ones do. In fact, all the later ones, they went to ABT fully, which I think was a great idea. That has 1 hydraulic tank. It has 2 pumps, one off the back of the main engine, one off the back of the wing engine, and you can run the thrusters off of either. You don't get full power off of the main engine, because when you're coming into a marina in here, in a place like this, you're going to be running at idle, so you don't have enough oil flow to run the thrusters at full RPM, especially if you want to run both together. But it is nice if you're waiting for a bridge or something, you don't have to start the wing engine up every time you want to bump a thruster. You can raise a throttle on the main. So we've got a backup chart plotter there. We've got an Iridium Go, which is a really nice system. We've got a camera system. We've got a big commercial radar, which is nice. Displays aren't great on this boat, but the middle display is. That's been replaced. It's a Hatland display. I love them. They've come a long way. That is not a touchscreen display, but I do like those displays. They're good. VHF radio. Across the top, we've got some new electronics. We've got some Maritron system that Bill put in some years ago, 3 owners ago. And we've got double autopilots on this boat, windshield wipers, horn. I'm going to turn that horn on later and let you hear it. That's awesome. And we've got forward-looking floodlights. These controls are for the floodlights up on the foredeck. Those are really nice to have. And then there's one pointing aft as well. Air conditioning in this boat is good. Even in the tropics, it can keep this pilot house nice and cool. Outlet over here, outlet over there for the air conditioning. And the windows on these boats are super dark tinted, which actually gives you kind of a dull outlook on life. Once you know, when you've been out at sea for a while in a pilot house of a 62, you kind of think it's dull and dark outside. But you know what? It keeps the light down and it keeps the wood looking good. I mean, look at the wood in here. This is a 2003, and the wood. This is a Dashing boat, and the wood all looks fantastic. So you know, happy about that. All right, I think we're moving on. We're going downstairs. Look at these stairs down here. Good handholds everywhere. Good handhold here. This looks all like it was factory. Maybe this one was added. This looks like it was factory. But these stairs are steep. Now the treads have been covered with carpet because there was a dog. Previous owner had a little. Actually, present owner has a dog, and it enables the dog to get a little bit of traction if the dog's coming up or down the stairs. But I think even the dog finds this a little bit steep. Don't fall now. So this is what I was talking about, this non-skid here. Now this is actually worn off, but let me tell you something. When this boat was brand new, this was like sandpaper on here, and if you were wearing shorts and didn't have socks on, you come down there and that would take the backs off your legs. You'd be bleeding by the end of the day. I was just thinking about the pilot house, what I didn't say when I was up there, and you're sitting in that helm chair up there in the pilot house looking out through those forward windows, the array of forward windows up there, and you're looking out over that big deck. It is so awesome. It's like being in the pilot house of a little freighter with the sweeping deck. I mean, the sheer on this boat is absolutely gorgeous. Anyway, back down in the galley now. Gorgeous, spacious galley. I mean, look at the amount of space you got in here for preparing meals. And I mean, 2 people, actually 3 people could probably work in this galley. You got all kinds of space there on the countertop, storage space up above. The galleys are different on some of the boats. They're shaped differently, and some of them have bar stools around here. I don't know if this ever had bar stools. The floors are slightly different in here too. They don't have teak and holly. They're just straight teak. The overhead here is pretty standard. 6228, which we sold a few years ago, does not have this. It's been deleted, which actually changes. It makes the volume in here seem amazingly huge. But I think it's a bit of a challenge because without this storage here, you lose a lot. You know, there's a lot of plate cup storage up in the top, and without that, it's a challenge to find spaces for everything. So even though it's a huge galley, there isn't a huge amount of storage in the 62 galley. Couple of teeny little drawers here for knives and what have you. Nothing under here because back in here is the engine room and the master stateroom. So you got nothing down here. Some of the galleys on 62s have a Sub-Zero full-size refrigerator right here. I personally like having the port here because it brings extra light into the galley. You've got an opening port here, so you can open that sucker up, and when you're anchored, you get a little bit of airflow through here, which is nice. You got the countertop, hob or burners, propane on this boat. You've got an oven down here. Some of the boats didn't have an oven, so we have added ovens. Some of them had dishwashers, some of them didn't. We've added dishwashers, we've deleted dishwashers. You know, you can't please everybody. It seems like if it has a dishwasher, people don't use it, or they want something else. So if it doesn't have a dishwasher, they want one. This has a dishwasher. Probably been changed, actually, I think. Also has a trash compactor. There's a fair amount of storage under the sinks there, and we've got these drawers for plates and what have you. So, and then we've got here a refrigerator and a freezer. These are all Sub-Zeros. Quite a few of the boats were built this way with an array of refrigerators and freezers. And then, of course, you've got the chest freezer. I didn't open it up and show you, but up in the pilot house, there's the big chest freezer underneath the pilot bunk at the back of the pilot house. So that's why there's only one freezer here, because you've got all that added storage up in the pilot house, isn't it? And then we got this is usually used for the vacuum cleaner. I don't know where the vacuum cleaner hose is on this boat, tucked away somewhere, but this boat has central vac, which many of them do. It was an option. A lot of people went for that, central vac, which is kind of nice. I had some challenges along the way with central vacs not sucking very well. Had it with this boat too, but I found some leaks in the PVC pipe. There's PVC pipe that runs all throughout the boat, and you know, I have found it where it wasn't glued together properly and it was leaking. So that's something to look out for. Again, I talked about the doors. The doors are all in super nice shape, really good quality doors. A little bit of touch up here and there probably on a boat of this age, but they look super good. Okay, so we're dropping forward down to 2 steps there, 3 steps actually. There's some storage under these steps. We won't go into that, but now we are, and some people complain about the 62 being a bit like a rabbit warren. Well, this is a 3 stateroom 62, so you know, it really isn't. You've still got a long kind of drawn out companionway, and we'll go forward in a second, you can see it, but we've got a master cabin which is bigger. I think we should probably pop in here first. So this is the master. This is a big master. So if you take a 4 stateroom 62, the master is cut back considerably, back to here, and then the head and shower, which you can come through and take a look at that, the head and shower is considerably smaller too. Even though there isn't a lot of there aren't a lot of hull ports here, you've got this one and it's closed, it's actually still remarkably light in here. You've got these little ports that are out onto the foredeck. Those let in a lot of light. If you look carefully, the headliners are failing in here. This is why Matthew's just been redoing all the headliners in here. We have not done this cabin yet, and actually most of it looks good, but it definitely is failing. You can tell when you push on the headliner, the foam is starting to fail, which is a shame. But anyway, we'll get them done. Big hanging locker there, big hanging locker here. Nothing in that, all cedar lined, all smell good. Now, take a look in there while I pull up the floor. I'm going to pull up the floor here so you can see the stabilizer, the access to the stabilizer. I've pulled up the floorboard here. You can see the color actually of this teak. This is pretty close to the color it would have been when it was new. It shrunk a little bit. This is why they didn't do this very much actually, because the teak tends to shrink back a little bit, so you can see the cracks where it's opened up. I mean, it doesn't look terrible, it's quite uniform actually, but some of them were worse than that, where the teak shrank back. Maybe, you know, it was a little green perhaps when the boat was built, and then it shrank back and opened up. So this is the access to the portside stabilizer fin. So as you can see, this has got track ABT 250s, and pretty good access. You want to work on these things, you can get to it from above. You know, you're on your knees, but good access to service them. These are the non-automatic locking fins, so you've actually got a pin. If you want to center them and pin them, the pin's here. You pull the pin out, you can drop it in. Right now, I left them flopping, so the fins have flopped over, and which is fine because this is a nice calm marina. This has its own little bilge pump. It's got a bilge pump and a bilge pump switch in here in case you did take on water, it would pump it out. If you've got water in here, usually speaking, it's fresh water. There's fresh water plumbing and what have you under the bed. There's an air conditioner under this bed. Under the center of the bed, there's a large accumulator tank. And when I say large, it's a big one. So, which is really nice to have. It just, the accumulator tank means that the water pump's not cycling on and off as much. And occasionally, if we get a pinhole leak or something in the water system, that fresh water ends up coming into this locker. So usually if you open this up and there's water in it, the first thing I'll do is taste it and make sure it's fresh, because if it's not fresh, if it's salty, we might be sinking, but usually it would be fresh. There is on the 62 there is a pressure relief valve, or sorry, pressure reducing valve cartridge in this locker here on the port side of the master stateroom, and it is noisy sometimes. So people complain when you're running underway because you've got a, depending on how the boat's set up, you may have a system that's running at higher pressure and drops that pressure down for the stabilizers, and it happens in this locker, and sometimes that kind of causes a hiss, which annoys people. So again, something to be aware of. You've already looked in there. This boat has vacuum flush heads, and most of the 62s had vacuum flush heads. This boat has 3 toilets. The vacuum flush systems on these boats have a one vacuum flush pump, which is an M pump, and it's mounted in the back of the engine room on the port side. That pump is for all the heads on the boat. Some of these boats have 5 heads, and when you put 5 heads, actually I'm trying to think, Lady K, is it 5 or 6? Maybe it's 6. It's a lot of heads on one pump. And it's a challenge. There's a trunk line that runs up the port side of the boat. That pump sucks the trunk line down, and it sucks down every head on the boat. And if you've got a vacuum leak in one of the heads, it can be challenging sometimes to track that down. We have a way of doing it, and we've added isolation valves on a lot of these boats, so you can shut each head down individually and try and track down the head that has the problem. When you don't have isolation valves and you've got 5 heads and one pump, it's a mission to find that leak. So something to think about when you're buying a boat. Think we're good in here? Let's move on. But before we leave, one more thing. This is the DC distribution, basically the center point of where the charging from the engine room meets the batteries up forward. So the battery positives and negatives are coming back here, and the alternator outputs, and sometimes there are chargers in the battery room, and there are chargers in the engine room, and it all comes through this little locker here and then across to the main panel, which is here. So we got the main electrical panel, always in the same place on a, well, I like to say that. I think it's all, it's always been in the same place on any that I've worked on. I haven't worked on every single one, but I worked on most of them. So I can open this up real quick. Let me just show you. It's very similar, built in the same factory as the 57, and I showed you that one. I'll show you this one too. It probably looks similar, all very neat and tidy, which is normal on a Dashing boat. I mean, like I said on the 57, it's artwork. This one, somebody's been in here poking around. I think it's a little bit cluttered in places. It looks like people have had their hands in here. Those are not standard cable ties. They're not, yeah, there's been some work done in here. Some things have been changed, but it still looks pretty darn good. And then we got breakers up in there for the inverter outputs. This boat, later boat, like I said, Hull 26 has a inverter bypasses built right into the panel here. Early boats didn't have that. I've put inverter bypasses on some of them. They did not come as standard when the boats were built originally. Probably I would say most of the boats have bypasses by now. Got a question who put them in, how did they do it, where they're located. There isn't a standard location for it, but like I said, the later boats do have the bypasses right on the panel here. So air conditioning on the right side, 110 volt leg 1 and leg 2, got 2 separate inverters. These are SW inverters, same as the 57 we were looking at, SW series. This is the main ship's panel. most of this stuff can be powered by inverters now. You can even power the air conditioners by inverter, but you got to be careful with that. Obviously, air conditioners are a big load. You can run one. The idea was this boat had a hydraulic alternator, and you could actually run the hydraulic alternator off the main engine, which would keep the inverters up. There's two SW 4024s, so you've got 8 kilowatts of inverters here at 110 volts, 4 kilowatts at 240 volts. You've actually got enough to run an air conditioner, but there's a lot of juice flowing through everything, and if you're doing that, you gotta be careful. You gotta kind of keep an eye on things. Not really recommended. I think the best way of running air conditioners is to run the generator. Anyway, so that's your main electrical panel. Okay, so we're under the starboard side now. This is the walkway coming down from the steps from the galley, and you can see how the wood changes color with the carpet down over the years. So this is the starboard side stabilizer. Again, really good access, better than the other side actually. You know, if you want to get in there and service these. ABT stabilizers, great, love them, great company, and you know, they've had some challenges over the years. We've done a lot of work on ABT stabilizers. Lucky enough to have Tony Fields working for us now, which and he is just a wealth of knowledge. I think he's been working on these things for close to 30 years. There have been some changes made over the years. One is the locking pins. Like I said, the other is upgraded shafts. This boat has a small spline shaft. Small spline shafts we've discovered over the years. You know, the early ones had those, and you know, they can be problematic. The splines tend to break. Well, they can break off on the top of the shaft. So whenever you're to pull them apart, it's worth looking at that. And they do sell a kit to upgrade those to the larger splines now. So at some point when you're having them serviced, it's definitely worth having a look to make sure that they're in good shape. 2 generators on this boat. You saw back aft. There's a little one in the Lazarette, and then there's a 20 kW in the engine room. We've got 2 water makers right here. They're both in the engine room. You'll see shortly as well. This is the DC panel at the bottom here, 24 volt DC panel. We got a Meritron system, which I started earlier. That was added, and I think I mentioned it in the 57 video. So the 62, the fuel tanks, actually one of the fuel tanks was right under there. You could see it when I had the floor open for the stabilizer. So this is the aft starboard fuel tank. The mid fuel tank and the port fuel tank, mid fuel tanks in here underneath this carpet. Let me show you real quick. Okay, so that's the mid tank, all nice and clean and dusty down there. That's always good to see. We got the fill line, we got the fill line, we got the vent line, we've got the pickup line, we've got the return line, and we've got a transfer line. And this line right here, that's a little tiny line, that's for the, which was what I was going to talk about, that's for the tank tender. Now, most of the fuel tanks on this boat, with the exception of what we call the day tank in the engine room starboard side, most of these fuel tanks are under the floor up forward. So there's no sight gauges. So that presents a bit of a challenge figuring out how much fuel you've got. What I would like to do to this boat, and what every boat, every 62 should have, is a second way of fuel level checking. But they all have, I think they all have this tank tender system. So basically you hit the button for the tank, then you pump it up, and then, so what that does is sends a little pump of air down that little tiny tube, and then when you let go of it, you hold the button, you stop pumping, the fuel comes back up the tube, it pressurizes the tube between there and the gauge, and it holds the needle up, and then you read off the display, and then you have to measure it off against this card, which is handily kept in one of these drawers. Most of the 62s have them, and then you can look and see how many inches you've got, and that equates to how much fuel depending on which tank you're reading. Yeah, if you're spending $1 million on a boat, it's kind of a bit cheesy, but anyway, there you go. Holding tank. Like I said earlier, we got the key there, so you can turn it on when you want to pump the holding tank out, turn it off when you're done and stick it in a drawer. Tell nobody to touch it. Right, we are moving forward. So we've got pantry space, storage, lots of storage space on this 3 stateroom 62. We've got another pantry in here. This is kind of a neat feature. This is where the owner has a dirty laundry. So actually, there's a chute on the other side in the master stateroom, so you can put your dirty laundry in there, and then when you're on this side, you can open it up, carry it out to the washing machine. How cool is that? So this is what we would call the day head. It's all closed up, but the lights are on. Day head has double access, so you've got access to the starboard cabin through that bifold door, like the 57 a little bit. Water tank is down here. And then this is the starboard cabin. So that's a fairly good size starboard guest cabin. Here we've got a washer dryer. Those things tuck away nicely, and they've got little stoppers on the inside, so you push them in and they lock. Nicely thought out, so once you've locked them they don't slide in and out. So we've got a dryer up top, washing machine in the bottom, and then here when you're pulling all your laundry out of the dryer, you got a folding table. That was thoughtful. It's the little things. So I'm up in the forward cabin on the 3 stateroom 62, and the forward cabin is pretty spacious also. We've got a double on the port side here, a couple of hatches in the overhead, Luma hatches that open. They've got screens across them right now, and then there's a big Luma hatch here with a step ladder, so if you want to climb out the forward cabin you can, right through the Luma hatch up onto the foredeck. And then there's another bunk here, lots of cupboards and storage. Obviously you can see right now the owner's using this as a storage area for his fishing rods, fishing gear, and cushions and bedding and what have you. So not an easy place to kind of get you in and show you around, but you can get a good idea from this. And also I wanted to open this up and show you what's going on down here. So I'm down here in what we call the mid-bilge on the 62, and we got one more forward here, and then there's a bulkhead to the bulbous bow. This mid-bilge houses the inverters, so you can see that port side inverter right here, and there's another one over here to starboard. And also this is the davit pump assembly, so there's a hydraulic reservoir on here. The davit's 240 volt, so that's the 240 volt motor that drives the pump, which is right under this stack of valves. So when you hit a button on the controller up there for the davit, it energizes one of these solenoids, which gives you your different functions: left, right, up, down, and out. So and then we've got another bilge pump down inside here because it's got its own little sump. There's no water down here. This is usually a fairly dry bilge. Now you might get a little bit of water comes down through the davit. This is the davit standpipe. You probably noticed one of these in the galley also. The standpipe in the galley it basically holds the ceiling up, and also there's a whole bunch of wires and what have you that run down inside that pipe in the galley. This one here just houses the hydraulic hoses and the wiring for the davit. Over here on the starboard side, I can take the camera down here and show you. Over here on the starboard side, we've got a vacuum tank. That's a vacuum tank for the freshwater flush on the vacuum flush system. We've got a sink drain valve. We've got fuses down here for the inverters. We've got inverter output breakers. This is the control box with the board for the davit, and then we've got some valving and what have you. There's a little fire extinguisher down inside here, obviously because we've got some inverters. And then Matthew was asking, what's that? Well, that is one of the manual bilge pumps. We are going to open up the forward bilge. Sorry about that. And hang on a second. Oh, there it is. Dummy. Shall I do that again?
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to open up the forward bilge, and this time I know exactly where the hook is. Right there. And I'm going to climb down in here and turn the lights on. You can see this is quite a deep locker. There's a lot going on down here. It's a place that you don't want to ignore. Come down here once in a while. It helps if you're my size. If you're small, like me, it's a piece of cake. I'm just going to go down here and see if I can track down the light switch. There it is. They're all in different spots on different boats. Okay, so, and I could keep on going down here. Actually, can you see? Yeah, you can see pretty well. So this hatch here goes up into the bulbous bow. It's pretty echoey down here. This goes up into the bulbous bow. Much easier to get to than the last one I was on. I was on this 132 a couple of months ago, and I actually, when we surveyed the boat, one of the things that I said to the buyer was, we need to look in there and see what's going on. We got to the end of the survey, and the surveyor, of course, was like, well, there's an area there that I didn't get into, and I promised I would do it. So I took all the bolts off and I got that hatch out, but it was a mission because there's a whole bunch of stuff mounted in front of it, hydraulic equipment, and I had to move all that stuff out of the way to open up this hatch and have a look in there. Now, what's in there? Well, you might well ask, what's in there? On this boat, we've got a whole bunch of hydraulic plumbing going up there. There is a tube that runs through the bulbous bow, which houses the bow thruster. On top of that, you've got the bow thruster motor and associated plumbing. And on this boat, you've also got a directional valve that sits up inside there. The directional valve is the valve that shifts the oil back and forth to make the bow thruster go port or starboard, depending on which way you push the stick, right? That directional valve is, you got to keep them dry. It's got electronics in the top of it. It has a little circuit board in the top of it. It's they rust if they get water on them, so it's a good idea to keep an eye on that sucker. You think that it's dry up there, but it isn't necessarily, because you've got a shower forward of this, and those showers sometimes get leaks. And also you've got the chain locker up there, and the chain locker's above, and sometimes on the 62s the chain locker leaks down into here, and you can end up getting water up in here. So it's a good idea to look in there once in a while and see. What I also do occasionally is just open this valve, because this valve, if it opens and water comes out, let's see what happens here, because this hasn't been open for a while. Perfect. It's dry. I'm glad about that, because if it was wet, I'd look like an idiot. Okay, so open that once in a while and make sure it's dry and nothing comes out. If you do that, you're probably good, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't open this up once in a while. Pop all these nuts off, stick your eyes in there with a flashlight and check, because also hydraulic leaks, if you've got hydraulic coming out of here, you've got a leak up forward. But get in there once in a while, put your eyes on it, make sure that you haven't got chafe, hydraulic leaks, rust, and what have you. Now, underneath on these shelves, we've got all of our house batteries. Like I was saying earlier, the 62 has all its batteries up in the bow. It's a long way from here to the back of the boat where the loads are. So think about that when you're buying one of these things, and pay attention to the way that it's wired. And if you're not sure about that, you need to call somebody like me to make sure that it's all done properly and it's all working properly. There's all kinds of stuff going on down here. If you give me the camera, Matthew, I'll poke it around so that you can see. I don't want to scare you guys, but be careful not to touch the buttons. Okay, so there we go. So we got batteries down here on several layers. I think this boat has a total of 16 8D batteries. These batteries probably last about 7 years. Depends on how they're taken care of, but just beware. They're about $650, $700 a piece. So when you're buying one of these boats, you want to make sure that the batteries are all in reasonable condition. All right, we've got bilge pumps, we've got shower sump pumps, we've got manual bilge pumps, and we've got a whole bunch of Maritron stuff in here too. We've got a fire extinguisher up here forward, we've got valves for hydraulics, and we also have one more vacuum tank for the vacuum flush system. In fact, if you look right above my head, hopefully it's not dripping, that's the underside of the forward toilet. So, and that's the sewage hose coming out the bottom of it, and the blue one is the water feed for that forward vacuum flush head. There's a valve right there to turn the water feed off if you're working on the head, so that you don't get a deluge of water when you unplug it. Alright, here we are. Oh, look who it is! It's Jason from Your Tech. Hopefully he's got our tables. I don't know if you noticed, but back in the salon we were missing 3 tables because Jason stole them. And he took them up to the shop to refinish them because they were looking a little shabby. And let's go see what they look like. Oh, actually, I think he only brought one back. So Jason has just brought this table back. We actually have 3 tables, one on here, one on this pedestal here, and then there's a piece that slides in this groove in the middle. And that piece, I'll show you the storage spot for it. Very neat storage spot on these 62s for the slide-in piece. This is not screwed down yet, but you can see done a superb job of spraying this table in our spray booth. It looks absolutely gorgeous compared to the way it looked when he took it out. He took all the old varnish off, took it right back to bare wood. Thank you very much, Jason. Nice job.
Thank you.
Now get back to work.
Later.
All right, and so the middle piece for that table actually slides in here. You can see it's got a felt lining here, track, top and bottom, so it neatly slides in there for safe storage, and that way you can walk in between the 2 tables. Now, 6225 was the first 62 to have a counterbalance system, and it did not have these fixed pedestals. It had, Tim was the owner of that boat. If you're watching this, you did a great job, Tim, designing that system, and yes, you should have got royalties for it. I know you were concerned about that. An awesome counterbalance system that actually folded down. The 2 side pieces of the table came together low down like a coffee table and then clipped together, so you had like a low coffee table affair. And then if you unclipped them and run them back up again, you got to see these things. You may have seen them if you've been on a later model 62. We actually put one in 6215. He saw it and wanted it, so we bought one, had it shipped over, and I installed it. Absolutely, amazing piece of design work. But these are fixed, so the height of the table is the height of the table. So that looks really good. I'm happy about that. The owner will be pleased to see them. And finally, the part you've all been waiting for. The engine room on the Nordhavn 62. Am I hesitant? Slightly. The reason that I'm slightly hesitant is because this, by far, is the most difficult thing to get your head around. And when I say get your head around, I mean get your head around. It's not very big. And although I really love the 62, I've got a lot of bruises and scars on my back from coming up these stairs too quickly. I actually quite like this boat because it's curved right here. And some of the early ones don't curve right there, and they have screws sticking out. And I swear I've got scars on my back from that, from coming out of the engine room too quickly. And I've got bruises and bashes. And anyway, come on down. I like everything about the 62, and I even quite like the engine room. But when you bring people down here for the first time, and if they've been on any of the other bigger Nordhavns, that have stand-up engine rooms, and even the 57, you come down here and it's like, oh, crikey, it's there's not a lot of room down here, I think I brought one customer down one time, and I was surprised. Lou Goodwin, are you out there, Lou? I brought her down. They had a 47, Guy and Lou stood up there in front of the engine. I was like, perfect, a stand-up engine room. She's pretty small, so cute, small. So we've got the wing engine back here, and if you're working in the back of the wing engine, well, I tell you what, why don't you film me trying to get in and out of here, just so people know how tricky it is. I can do it, but once you're back here, you got to turn around and come back out again. So when I'm working on something back here, I like to get myself in here, get my tools organized, and generally have somebody with me that can pass me tools. Now, when I was a little bit younger, I didn't mind it at all, but now I like to get in here and have everything with me, or have somebody to pass me tools, because if you're working on the hydraulic cooler, or if you're working on the PTO on the wing engine, if you're working on changing zincs or belts or any of this stuff, invariably you don't have the right tool back here when you need it. Somebody's going to have to pass it to you. Now, you do have some access across to the other side on this particular boat. It's actually fairly open there, so you can lay your tools out on the floor over on the port side and kind of reach over and get them. The PTO on this boat precludes you from being able to change out the belt, so we always have spare belts kind of zip tied in place so that you can change the belt without having to take the clutch and the PTO. This is a 24-volt clutch on this boat that engages the PTO for the stabilizers, or for the thrusters mostly, but this would work with stabilizers too if you wanted it to. Hydraulic tank right here, with a sight gauge and a thermometer in the middle of it, pretty standard on the ABT system. Oh, that's an old zinc. I probably left that there. We've got a bunch of valves out here, and we've got an engine room blower here that brings air in. These blowers are the same types of blowers on the 57. They're Dayton blowers. They rust. Oh, you can hear the rust coming off of it. So it hasn't been run for a while, and all these chips and stuff is from that blower, which, although the body of the thing looks like it's in really nice condition, the inside of it probably is going to need to be changed at some point. So Peter has probably put that on the list, I'm guessing. There's one here, there's one on the forward port side intake, and there's one on the forward starboard side, which is an outlet too. So starboard blows out, port blows in. The challenge with the way they rigged this engine room ventilation up is you got one blowing in and one blowing out, and what happens is that air comes in on one side of the engine room, nice and cool, and the other blower sucks it right back out again, so it doesn't really do very much. So what we've done on some of the boats is put a deflector shield so that it kind of pushes it back in the engine room to displace some of the hot air back here, because it gets hot in here, there is no question. It's 100, 120, and sometimes more when you're down in Florida, in South Florida. Depends on the blanket, on the thickness of the blanket. You can probably see this blanket's been changed out. It's really quite a nice new blanket. It also has blowers. I just added another blower to 6232 to try and help the situation, because you got all that hot air over the top of the engine, and you'll see, I'll point it out to you in a second. Matthew, let me out. I'm getting claustrophobic. No, I'm not really. I'm just ready to move on and show you a different spot. So this is on my way out. You can see this is the central back system, which has this PVC pipe that runs out and around through the boat. Wing engine has its own shaft and gory propeller, which you probably all know by now. So this just protects the coupling here, and then it's got its own little shaft out on starboard, which makes for interesting maneuvering when you're on the wing engine, but it'll get you home probably at about 5 knots or so, 5.5. Okay, so this is a John Deere 6125, and they used a number of different engines in 62s. They used the Komatsu for a long time. They used the 6125 John Deere. 6220 had a Cummins N14, great engine, massive engine, probably right up to here. Not very much room above the engine, between the engine and the overhead. So PTO, this PTO here drives the stabilizers, the ABT stabilizers. Needs a little bit of touch-up, paint touch-up, but mechanically all good. And what do we got over on the other side there? If I squeeze over there, I was going to clean out the engine room and make it all presentable, but that's not really the way it is. Okay, when you come down, because most people want to have tools and they want to have stuff around, and there aren't that many places to put it, and so I find when you're on a 62, you come down here and it's cluttered. You've got tool bags, you've got toolboxes, you've got equipment laying around. I mean, it wouldn't all be laying around like this normally, but buckets and vacuum cleaners. I mean, this is the reality of the situation on a 62. There's not a whole lot of storage space for this kind of stuff, and it ends up down here, and you're working your way around it. We got our fire suppression bottle here. We've got a keel cooler, so this is keel cooled engine, of course, right? It's got a Walter keel cooler. This is the keel cool in and out for the engine. Master Volt battery charger for backup battery charging, and it used to have 3 chargers. That's why there's 3 breakers up there. It also used to have a hydraulic alternator, and the hydraulic alternator used to sit right here, but that's been removed, and actually the alternator is now belt driven off the main engine. It's a really nice stainless steel guard over the alternator. You'll see it on the port side forward. And this over here is the what we use is the engine room day tank. So a little bit awkward to see the sight gauge, but you can see right in here. You just kind of lean over the top of the toolbox. This is the only fuel tank with a sight gauge, and that's really the reason that we use it as the day tank, because we can actually see 100% how much fuel's in the tank without relying on those silly tank tenders. So, alright, we're going to move on around to the other side here. The water heater on this boat is tucked in this cabinet right here. Kind of a bear to get to. We've changed out a bunch of the water heaters on 62s, and you always have to take one of the water makers out of the way. In this instance, we'd have to take this whole wall out of the way. But I'd still rather have my water heater back here, tucked in here, than I would up there with those inverters, which is where it is on some of the 62s. There is a bilge underneath us down here, which is the one that does the bilge pump down there, does all the work from the packing gland. And we got 2 water makers on this boat, which need to be fresh flushed. And actually, I'll do it while we're in here. It's as simple as throwing those valves. So the water pump just came on, and so that's now pushing fresh water through the 2 water makers. So we'll let that run for a few minutes. Moving back, we've got a sea chest back here under the floor. It's right under my backside. There's a sea chest, and the sea chest is fed by these 2 strainers down here. I don't know if you can spin around, Matthew, and catch those. The 2 bronze strainers. Those have been changed out, I think, to Grocos. So we got intakes for that. One comes into each side of the sea chest. The sea chest is there. You probably already know this. I think I talked about it on the 57, so that you don't have as many holes in the bottom of the boat. So we've got 2 larger intake through holes down there that feed the sea chest, and then off of the sea chest we've got seawater that comes in for the generator. This is the bigger generator, 20 kW generator. Then we've got the 6 in the back. We've got the 2 water makers that feed off the sea chest. We've got the air conditioning. The air conditioning pump is back over here. So the air conditioning pump feeds off of the sea chest for water for the air conditioning. Up here we've got 2 autopilot pumps. 2 autopilot pumps, AccuSteer constant running pumps on top. Those are power hogs. Those are the ones that I was saying earlier. You know, if you've got a 12-volt boat, those may struggle with low voltage. And up there on the shelf we've got that's the M pump for the vacuum flush system. So, you know, it's all here. It's not quite so easy to get to. Oh, and we were talking up in the bow about the directional valve. So the directional valve, this is the directional valve for the stern thruster, which you can see is in super nice condition. There's no corrosion, no leaks or anything. Even all the fittings are all clean and nice. That's the directional valve for the stern thruster. When you push the stick back and forth, that energizes these 2 coils here and pulls a shuttle valve back and forth, which creates gives a path for the oil to go either one way or the other to make the stern thruster go left or right. This is the output breaker for the generator. We've got membranes up here for the one of the water makers. That's the steering manifold back there in the corner with all the red valves on it. When I was talking when I was in the back about using the emergency tiller, when you use the emergency tiller, you have to throw the bypass valve in the middle there. So you know, it's amazing how many people I talk to when I get on their boats, and it's like, okay, you know, when you put the emergency tiller on, you've got to throw this valve, right? This is the bypass valve right here. When you open that valve up, it allows the oil to flow back and forth between the 2 rams. If you don't open that up, you will not be able to move the rudder back and forth with the emergency tiller. So that's something important to know. This was added by us. This is the air pressure pump compressor for the Kallenberg horns. So this is what charges up that big tank in the bustle for the Kallenberg horns. A lot of the gauges, pressure gauges, have been removed on this boat. This originally would have had pressure gauges everywhere. We all know at this point, at least if you're a Nordhavn owner, you probably do, because it's been all over the Nordhavn site. But we've been having problems for years with these pressure gauges blowing. And if a pressure gauge blows, you can lose all your hydraulic oil, which is a big old mess. So we generally take the gauges out now and then screw in test ports. Now if you open up a test port, you can just plug in a test whip right into there, and then you can check the pressure, the running pressure of the system. So that has been done on this boat, which is nice. And I think that's probably it for this corner. I mean, I could probably keep on talking about other things. This is a trigger box for the air conditioners. This is what turns the air conditioning pump on when any one of the units, because there's several units around the boat, I think 5 maybe, when any one of those units turns on, this trigger box turns the saltwater pump on to move water through each of the air conditioners. So that's what that does. spend a lot of time with customers. Obviously, somebody that buys a Nordhavn 62 or any Nordhavn, you know, we spend probably more time down here going through all the nooks and crannies and pieces and parts of the engine room, and it's usually a Q&A session that lasts a day down here because new owners want to know what absolutely everything is, and it takes the best part of a day to go through an engine room on a 62. The fuel manifolds are very similar to the 57. You can see them on the way out. They're forward starboard. I already went over the fuel system on the 57, and so I don't really need to do that again. You can have a look. It looks complicated. It really isn't. It's a really neat fuel system, very well thought out. You can do everything you want with that fuel system. You can push fuel to all the engines. You can transfer fuel. You can polish fuel. I like it. I prefer it to having a small day tank like the newer boats have. Simply because you can pressurize the supply manifold, which is really nice. You can push fuel to the filters, and you can use that pump to help you get the engine started if you're bleeding them. And the fuel system here, like I said, similar to the 57, just not laid out in a straight line. So we got a supply manifold, we got a return manifold, and we have a transfer manifold. And while we're transferring fuel, we can make telephone calls at the same time. That's handy. So Matthew and I thought we'd bring the 62 out and do a little sea trial, and in the process we could take you around and show you some of the controls and show you how easy it is to maneuver this boat in the marina. However, as we pulled out of the slip, I discovered that we actually weren't getting a full hydraulic pressure. This boat, as I think I said down in the engine room, has hydraulic pumps on both the wing and the main engine, and those hydraulic pumps are controlled right here. So right now you can see the green lights on, the main pump is on, the wing pump is off. So we have the wing pump, the wing engine shut down right now. And what I normally do when I pull out of a slip, when I haven't been on a boat for a while, is I run the hydraulics, and this is a good exercise for all you Nordhavn owners out there with hydraulic systems with two pumps, is run the hydraulics off of both pumps one at a time. Energize the main pump and run the thrusters, make sure they're working. Turn the main pump off and then turn the wing engine pump on and make sure the thrusters are working. That way you know that each individual pump is working. If you just turn them both on, and we all get into the habit of doing that, you start the wing engine up, you turn the pump on, and then you raise the RPMs on the wing engine, which on this boat you do, so that you can have horsepower for the thrusters when you're maneuvering. If you do that, you don't actually know, unless you're really in tune with things, whether your wing pump is working or your main pump is working, either or. So it's a good idea to make sure that one and the other are both working. Well, we discovered as we were coming out of the slip, I thought that the thrusters seemed a little bit weak. Anyway, we discovered that the wing engine pump was not working. Luckily there wasn't a lot of breeze, and we pulled out of the slip and came out here, and it's a beautiful evening. We're out here off of Anacortes, between Anacortes and Güemes Island, and Matthew's just been driving the boat around while I've been down in the engine room figuring out what was wrong. So in a second here I'm going to take you down and show you what I did to diagnose this problem. I think I'm jinxed, because whenever I take a boat out there's always a problem, or maybe I'm just tuned into them, I don't know. But in this case it wasn't difficult to spot. So but what I would like to point out to everybody out there is that when you buy you know, a 15-year-old boat, a 20-year-old boat, you are going to run into problems here and there. You know, there's no such boat out there that doesn't have glitches and problems once in a while. So if you're in the market for a used Nordhavn, be prepared to pick up your tools once in a while, and probably call me. My phone is programmed with everybody's satellite phone numbers, so I get a lot of phone calls from people who have little glitches, and it may be something simple and it may be something more significant. I wouldn't expect anybody out there, not the average boat owner anyway, to be able to go down and diagnose what I just did. I'll call him back. to diagnose what I just did, but with a little bit of help over the phone to myself or to some of my guys. I mean, my guys are really good at troubleshooting too when I'm not available, especially Tony, and Rob is awesome, and Dan Neese, he's good. So those guys are always available for our customers, who can lead you to the problem, and with a little bit of help with a multimeter, and in this case a simple screwdriver. I just had Matthew turning the wing pump on and off here. We just sat still. Luckily it's not rough out here, so we just kind of coasted to a stop, and then Matthew hit the pump on and off while I was down in the engine room with a little tiny screwdriver checking to see if the coil was getting magnetized or not, and it wasn't. And I happen to know where the relay is, obviously, that drives that coil, and so I went into the box, and I'll show you in a minute where I went. And this boat has spare parts on board. That's another important thing, you know, when you're cruising around on an older boat, is make sure you've got the spares you need. And so there's some solid state relays inside the stabilizer and a hydraulic control box down there, the hydraulic control box. And I found a spare on board and switched it out, and now we have thrusters at full power again, so getting back into the marina will be a snap. Otherwise we would have been able to do it on the main engine, but if you can fix it and you can get everything working 100%, obviously it's safer. So so if you're in the market for a used Nordhavn, think about this. The perfect boat for you doesn't exist. It is not out there. You'll find the boat that you like, but there's always something that you don't like about it. Every Nordhavn is different. And just when you think you found the perfect one, either somebody will snap it up in front of you or it won't be available. And you go out there looking for another one and you can't find the same boat because it'll be different inside, it'll have a different layout, it'll have a different engine, it won't have hydraulics, whatever it is, it'll be different. There are so many of them out there and they are all different. So get used to the fact that you're going to have to put up with something you don't particularly like. You're out there looking for a boat, be open-minded. Make yourself a list of the important things and be prepared to scrub some of those things off the list and accept the fact that you may not get what you want. And it could be something as big as electric thrusters over a hydraulic package, especially today. You know, we're in 2020, which has been an interesting year. What's very interesting, of course, is that other than the world pandemic, is that people are buying boats like crazy, and there aren't very many out there. I remember not that long ago when people were calling me up and saying, why so many 55s on the market? What's wrong with them? Well, there's nothing wrong with them, but at the time people weren't buying boats. Now try find a 55. We did sell one recently, but there aren't very many of them out there. So when one comes on the market, be prepared. If you want a 55, you're probably going to have to take what comes up if you want to go boating soon. And they are out there, and they will pop up on the market. They sometimes get sold under the radar. There was one up here that Nordhavn sold under the radar a week or so ago. I think they're in the process. We have one coming up that'll probably sell before it hits the market too. So that's what's happening. So you may be talking to Nordhavn, you may be talking to the other brokers out there. You know, it pays to talk to everybody, of course, us included. We've got a lot of service customers out there, and we kind of know what they're up to. So anyway, those are some things to think about if you're in the market for a used Nordhavn. And don't forget, if it's an older boat, well, even a newer boat, you got to be prepared to pick up the tools once in a while, do a little bit of troubleshooting. This boat is so quiet, so quiet. We are just coming up with some amazing numbers. I mean, the 62 is a totally amazing boat. Everybody thinks that the 57 is my favorite now because I said it's one of my favorites. 62 is one of my favorites too. So we turned around because I wasn't sure how much current we had with us, and we turned around. We're actually going into the current now. We're running at 900 RPMs, and we're doing 5.5 knots, actually 5.8 now. So current's, we're bucking the current a little bit. 5.8 knots. We're burning 2 gallons an hour. Now, given it is calm, and so we're not bashing through any waves or anything, but the 62 shines. I mean, look at this, 5.8 5.8, 2 gallons an hour. I just did the calculation. Actually, it's more than that now. It's almost 7,000 miles on a tank of fuel at this rate. Who'd have thought? Now, you're not going to get that in real life because you're not going to want to go this slowly. And actually, once the seas start picking up, you need power to punch through them. But it's still remarkable that you can cruise along like this at almost 6 knots, burning 2 gallons an hour. So I did already talk a little bit about tankage on the boat. This boat carries 2,500 and a little bit of fuels. Cut. We already talked about fuel tankage a little bit. The 62 tanks are all under the floor. Going forward, there's one tank on the starboard side in the engine room that has a sight gauge. I think I mentioned that. 2,500 gallons of fuel, 2,576 actually on this boat, if the book is right, which sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. But I would say that's pretty close. So the range, as we just talked about with the fuel burn right now, I mean right now we're doing 4.5 knots. I throttled back, I'm at idle. We're doing 4.5 knots, and we don't have current with us, by the way. And we're doing, we're burning 1.4 gallons. Probably do 8,000 miles. 7,500, 8,000 miles. The boat cruises at 9 knots. You know, if I'm doing a trip on this boat, it's just like the 57. It's a 9-knot boat, 9-knot cruise, and she runs along beautifully at 9 knots, burning about a gallon a mile. So, and almost exactly the same fuel curve as the 57. You know, you start pushing it up above 9 knots, and you're going to end up burning like 16 gallons an hour. So that really does a number on your cruising range. But at 9 knots, you're going to get about 2,500 miles. You slow it down a little bit, you can hit that 3,000 mark very easily. The boat runs a lot smoother, I think, than the 57. Shorter shaft, considerably shorter shaft, half the length, and also a 3-inch stainless shaft. Many of them have been switched out to Aquamet 22 now. This one has an Aquamet 22 shaft. They all originally had 17, the older boats, and 17 shafts are probably, most of them have been got rid of now. You know, 20 years on, they get pitted and they do corrode, especially in a non-commercial environment when they're sitting in marinas. We talked about the wing engine a little bit. You saw it down in the engine room. The wing engine's the backup propulsion on this boat. Wing engine's going to drive you along at probably 4.5, 5 knots. In calm water, we could probably do that right now. The reality is that when you get out there and you're in a big sea, trying to punch through a sea is not happening with a wing engine. You know, you might make 1 or 2 knots depending on the size of the waves. You're going to have to turn around and go with it. There are some boats out there, a couple of them that have the hydraulic drive off the generator. 6220 has that. It's a belt drive. I've replaced that belt. A big toothed belt that engages on the shaft and drives the main shaft and the main propeller, which is actually a pretty good way of doing it, but a lot of people want that wing engine, and of course the wing engine gives you complete redundancy because you've got a separate propeller as well. And this has a little folding propeller. I think this has an old Martec prop. Everything's gory now. The gory props are really nice, much smoother running. Would be a nice upgrade. So wing engines tend not to get used enough. This wing engine has what does it have on it? 495 hours. And the reason it's got so many hours on it is because it's been used for hydraulics, just like on that 57 that we were looking at, which is a good thing. Wing engine, as you saw in the engine room, is tough to get to, so they tend to lack a little bit in maintenance. People don't get their back to the raw water pump as much as they should. We always have work to do when we get on a 62 because they tend to get neglected in there. I've forgotten what I was going to talk about. Now I know. So, so one of the things we talked a little bit about on the last video with 57s was heads and holding tanks and hose runs. If you don't treat the heads and the lines in the holding tank with a good product like NoFlex, we sell a lot of NoFlex, people love it. But if you start using NoFlex and you've never used anything before, it starts releasing all the calcium. In a head system, you get a lot of calcium buildup in the lines. If you've ever worked on toilet lines, you probably are aware, you know, they get lined with calcium and it's quite solid. And you can break it and it comes out in chunks. Well, when you have chunks of calcium breaking free in a vacuum flush system, it's a problem, because those chunks go down and they get caught in the duckbill valves. And on this boat, there's a bunch of duckbill valves. You've got duckbills at the vacuum chambers, you've got duckbills down at the vacuum pump itself in the engine room, and there's a ton of line between the two. And if you get a chunk in the duckbill valve, you know, the heads cycle, and then a big chunk will stop the toilet paper and whatever else, and now you've got a blockage, and it happens. So beware if you're buying an older 62. If it hasn't had work done on the head system, you're probably going to be doing it. And also, if you start using NoFlex, NoFlex will, you know, start releasing some of that calcium. It's very good at that, and then you'll end up with those chunks down there causing problems for you. So you need a lesson in vacuum flush if you're going to own a boat with vacuum flush systems on it, especially a 62, because they're all spread out. You know, you got one all the way at the bow, and then some of the boats, like I said, they have multiple heads, 6 heads and one at the stern. They're all tied together with plumbing and trunk lines. The holding tank is underneath the engine, which is difficult to get to. You don't have to get to the holding tank very often, but to work on the sender unit, the Salon tank sender is right under the main engine, and the vent line and all of that. So you know, you got to be prepared to get down under there to get to anything. No grey water tank on this boat. So we just got back to the dock, and we're going to go down the engine room, and I'm going to show you what I did out there. But as you can see, the boat is a bit of a pickle because I was hunting for these solid state relays, and I knew that I had seen some of these under the couch somewhere, and finally I found them in this bag on the galley countertop. But you know, it's always important when you have your spare parts to know where they are. So otherwise you've got to go through this. You know, it's not more than 62 feet away, but there's an awful lot of lockers in 62 feet. So anyway, I was lucky enough that I knew roughly where they were, and I managed to hunt one down. So what did I do to figure out what the problem was? I came down here, I had Matthew up in the pilot house. The first thing I needed to do was figure out where the coils are that drive the 2 pumps. Now I know what I'm looking for. So actually I went back here because on some 62s it's back behind the wing engine on the bulkhead there, but actually I could see it across here, so follow me. So this was the block that I was looking for, and I was actually over there looking across, and I'm like, oh, there it is. So what you need to do is find out which coil drives which pump. So the 2 of these coils drive the pumps, and I discovered that they're actually turned off right now, but this one is main engine and this one was magnetized. And if you have a little flathead screwdriver like this one and you hold it up to the end, you can feel the magnetism when it's turned on. So I had Matthew turn, by pressing the main engine pump on and off, I had him on the speakerphone, and I could hear him over the engine. And every time he turned it on, this got magnetized. And I'm assuming then, correctly so, but the main and the wing are usually together. So I did this one, and when he turned the wing engine pump on with the green button, there was nothing happening here. So the next step actually probably would have been to take the plug off and check the wires with a multimeter. But I didn't have a multimeter, and I took a bit of a gamble. There is a relay inside this box, and I'm going to show you that relay in a second, that drives the power to this coil. So this is basically an electromagnet, and this electromagnet, there's a metal valve inside here, and when this powers up and becomes a magnet, it draws the valve back and opens that valve, and that in turn sends pressure through this hydraulic hose here over to the wing engine pump to spool it up to make pressure. So let's head over to the other side of the engine room, and I'll show you where this coil lives. Okay, so my next stop was back here in my favorite spot next to the wing engine. Of course, it's all very hot down here because everything was running, and that's the bad relay. And so I'm not going to crawl in there right now, but these relays are marked, and there's actually on the inside of the American bow thruster box, maybe I will crawl in there and show you. These are all marked, and this is marked WPV. Wing pressure valve. If you're curious, normally, unless anybody stole it, and if they did, they should be shot, the wiring diagrams and what have you are taped on the inside of the hydraulic control box. It's always, that's the place that it lives. So when you're done with it, always put it back for the next person. So you got the PLCs back there, and to the left of the PLCs there's a whole bank of relays, and as you can see there's one relay, maybe you can see that, there's one relay third from the bottom which is hanging out. I unscrewed it, the screw is here. I basically unscrewed it, pulled it out, I cut the cable ties that held the wires in place so that I could remove it without having to remove the others, and then just pulled the wires off. And I was unlucky enough that one of the wires pulled out of the terminal while I was tugging on it, and I was trying to tug on the terminal, but the wire fell off in my fingers. That might have been part of the problem. Haven't figured that bit out yet. It could be the wire, maybe not the relay, but we do know that the relays go bad. So then I had to futz around with this little terminal and get the wire back in and crimp it back up again, pop that back on the new relay, and then I just had Matthew at that point start hitting the wing engine button while I went back over there with my screwdriver, and at that point now I could feel magnetism every time he hit the button, so I knew that we had success. So I'm going to wait for the engine room to cool down a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to put the relay in with the screw. I'm probably going to tug on all the other wires as well to make sure there aren't any other loose ones, because loose wires are a problem. And then I'll put the cover back on and tidy up. I'm going to do some vacuuming here and button the job up. But lucky that I found that before I deliver the boat back to Canada for the owner next week. All right, so there we have it. I could probably keep talking, and some of you are going to say you should have kept talking. But there is a limit, and most people don't want to sit and listen to my waffle for more than an hour. So I think I've probably said enough. I love the 62. I love almost all the Nordhavns, actually. But again, the 57 and the 62 are way at the top of my list. My favorites. Until the next one comes along. I'm James, Yacht Tech. Have a good day.